Okay, hello, welcome everyone to today's Humanities in Action, brought to you by Carolina Public Humanities. My name is Max Orr. I'm Executive Director of Carolina Public Humanities, and it's always a joy to welcome you here to Flyleaf Books. We have a really wonderful talk on the rights of nature coming up, and I just wanted to say a few things about Carolina Public Humanities' interest in environmental topics. We are working right now with the Carolina Biodiversity Collaborative to put on a series of events in the spring, and one of that centering on biodiversity, and so look for that in our spring brochure. I'll talk about that. But the reason I bring this up is that it was really interesting concepts that we learned about from our biologist friends. And the two concepts are the paradox of normalcy, this notion that as the world around us changes, we as humans associate what is normal. Like, we don't understand that what we're experiencing now is no longer normal. So people who were born younger than maybe some of the folks in this audience have had a very different experience. One of the things I bring to your mind is your experience perhaps of driving earlier in your life at night, and the number of bugs that used to be on your windshield, and how different that is today. Apparently some people tell me you can still get bugs in your windshield in other places, but it used to be everywhere. And that's just one incident. So we now live in a world where that is normal. The other thing I want to talk about is the extinction of experience. And the idea is that you don't value what you don't experience. And the more that we are not in touch with nature, the more that we do our activities inside, the more that we don't know what a world was like before we've had this warming trend, we can't value that. So these are two concepts that help us think about the changing environment from a human perspective, and things for us to consider. And what's really exciting for me is to learn about this concept, which is looking at this from the perspective perhaps of nature. I'm going to learn a lot about what this means, but what the rights of nature say to me is that there are another perspective that we need to consider here. And we're really excited to have this conversation and to learn a lot about what the rights of nature mean. And let me tell you who is going to give this wonderful talk. This is Professor Maria Savasta-Kennedy, is a clinical professor of law and director of the externship program at Carolina Law. She received her BA and JD from UCLA. And in private practice before coming to Carolina, Professor Savasta-Kennedy litigated federal and state environmental, civil rights, and commercial cases, including representing Earth Justice as associate attorney. At Carolina, in addition to directing and teaching in the law school's externship program, Professor Savasta-Kennedy teaches environmental law, environmental justice, and environmental law practice and policy. She's also the author of North Carolina's Environmental Practice Guide, now in its 5th edition. Professor Savasta-Kennedy serves as chairperson for the Sustainability Committee for the North Carolina Bar Association, Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources Council, is a member of the North Carolina Bar Association Diversity Task Force, and is a faculty advisor for the UNC Law Student Environmental Law Project. She's also shared her expertise on climate justice in Xi'an, China, under a Fulbright Award in 2012, where she also taught lawyering skills. She has been a generous contributor to CPH programs, having spoken at our events before, and also serving on our pre-COVID University Advisory Board. And as I mentioned, we're going to learn a lot about what this means. So it's a pleasure to welcome back Professor Maria Savasta-Kennedy as she discusses the rights of nature, an eco-centric vision for saving the planet. Professor. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Max, and thank you to the Carolina Humanities, and thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you about the rights of nature today. I'm hoping that you'll go away from this conversation with an understanding of what the rights of nature are, why we need them in the context of our inadequate legal system, and how the rights of nature are being used and can be used to stop the destruction of the planet. So, what are the rights of nature? Okay, let's all take a look at this picture of a person standing on a mountaintop. So, who has legal rights in this picture? The person, the mountaintop, both? Well, in our Western legal system and human-centric system of law, only the human has legal rights in this picture. The rights of nature, however, say that the mountains should also have rights. The rights to exist, the rights to continue to exist, and the right to be restored if damaged. So the rights of nature, unlike our current system, is grounded in an eco-centric system and view of the world. So instead of humans being the center of everything and viewing nature as something that we use and extract at our pleasure, an eco-centric view of the world emphasizes the value of all things, views all species, all ecosystems, land, water, air, and the earth itself to be part of an interconnected web. So, as eloquently stated by 7 Directions of Service, which is an indigenous group that advocates for the rights of nature and the rights of all people here in North Carolina, the rights of nature are a new kind of conservation law rooted in very old indigenous values. And those values recognize that the ecosystems in our natural world, such as forests, rivers, mountains, and lakes, should have legally enforceable rights to exist, to flourish, and to be protected. So, as I mentioned, the rights of nature have been recognized by indigenous cultures for centuries. And indigenous cultures have understood and revered the interconnectedness between humans and nature. And we humans are dependent upon nature, right, on this planet for our very survival. But our current human-centric viewpoint doesn't ensure the survival of nature or of ourselves. So, there exist different articulations of the rights of nature, but at its root, the rights of nature require that natural systems should be granted legal personhood and rights. So what does that mean? Well, it basically means that our mountain has the ability to sue in court for injuries sustained to itself and to receive a remedy to address those injuries. So for example, if a mining company seeks a permit to blow up part of the mountain, to mine for coal, for example, under the rights of nature, the mountain itself has a right to object to the damage the mining would cause to the mountain and its ecosystems. So the legal right to object, to have a say in whether the mining company gets its permit granted, doesn't just attach to the people who might live in the town below the mountain, but also attaches to the mountain itself. So how can a mountain or a lake sue someone in court, you ask? Well, what about, are there other non-human entities that we've granted legal personhood to? Right, corporations. Corporations, trusts, and lawyers routinely stand up in court and argue for the rights of corporations, for the rights of trusts. And these are legal fictions created by humans, right? So why shouldn't we allow somebody to stand up in court and speak for the rights of the mountain? When the Haw River is polluted by industrial toxins such as PFAS and dioxin, there is an injury to the entire Haw River ecosystem, as well as to the people downstream drinking the water. And that includes people in Pittsboro and Chapel Hill, right? So, all right. Why do we need rights of nature? Don't our current environmental laws protect humans and nature? Well, the answer is no, they don't, not enough. But for a few federal laws, like the Endangered Species Act, the focus of our environmental laws is human-centered, not ecosystem-centered. And let's face it, the environmental laws that we are looking to for protection are outdated. They were passed in the 1970s. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and others, they were passed almost 50 years ago. Now that said, countries around the world emulated our system of environmental laws because they had such promise. And we have seen improvements, right? Taking the lead out of gasoline has had huge improvements in the air that we breathe. And the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act have had immense impacts on modernizing our public sewer and water infrastructure and improving the quality of our drinking water. But it's not enough. So for example, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the Department of Agriculture, and the Environmental Protection Agency are all tasked with testing aspects of the human and health impacts of new and existing chemicals. However, we're always behind and racing to catch up as new chemicals are developed. Of the over 84,000 chemicals in circulation in the U.S. today, only 1% of them have been tested for safety. Let's just take a moment for that to sink in. 1% of those 84,000 have been tested for safety. So part of the reason for this is industry recalcitrance. Going through these processes and government bureaucracy may cost industry a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And the laws are full of loopholes. So, for example, when you look at the label of many health and beauty products, you'll see that one of the ingredients listed is fragrance. But fragrance may include any number of man-made and natural ingredients, including some of those 84,000 chemicals that haven't been tested. And that is because any ingredients falling under the label fragrance is considered to be a trade secret and is not required to be disclosed under the U.S. Cosmetics Act of 1938. Yeah, so it's been that way since 1938. And moreover, we really don't have the resources and the ability to stay on top of all these chemicals. We continue to create new chemical compounds that we've not had time to vet before they end up in our water and our land and our air. So take, for example, the Cape Fear River Basin. How many of you have heard about Gen X pollution in the Cape Fear River? Right. Everybody here has. So that Gen X came from Chemours Company. And you may recall that because of the contamination of Gen X in the Cape Fear River and the Cape Fear River Basin, residents in that area were told to drink bottled water because of Gen X contamination in their tap water. So Gen X belongs to a group of man-made chemicals known as PFOA or PFOS. And they're types of perfluoroalkyl substances. They're man-made chemicals that are heat, grease, and water resistant. And they've been used since the 1950s in consumer products and industrial processes because they're useful, right? But however useful the properties of these chemicals may be, they have an important downside. They have been shown to create human health problems such as liver damage, thyroid disease, obesity, fertility issues, and cancer. And that's in humans. And we're at the top of the food chain, right? These toxins have already done extensive and lasting damage to the ecosystem and the critters living in the river and that ecosystem by the time they make it up the food chain to humans. And these chemicals, PFOS and PFOA, are called forever chemicals because they take thousands of years to degrade in nature, and they can build up in the bodies of humans and other critters indefinitely. And we keep finding new variations of these toxic chemicals. Just within the last week, scientists from UNC and NC State found 11 types of PFAS in the Cape Fear River that were previously undetected in those waterways. And 8 of those 11 were new to EPA, right? And in fact, guess how many variations of PFAS and PFOA there are? 100, 1,000. There are 15,000 variations of PFAS and PFOA. And when each time one is banned, another variation is created and used. So it's like playing whack-a-mole. Pardon to the moles here. Each time we identify one and say we need to stop using this, another is created. And so these substances are being created and disposed of without any real idea of what they're doing to our bodies or to the earth. So let's take a moment to talk about some of the non-human species that we share the earth with. I mentioned the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act is 50 years old this year, and it was passed in order to protect endangered and threatened animals and their ecosystems, plants and animals and their ecosystems, their habitats. Yet animals in the US and across the planet, from the deepest depths of the ocean to those hiding in the trees of the Amazon, are dying off. The World Wildlife studies more than 5,200 species of animals and found that of the nearly 32,000 populations analyzed, there was an average decline of almost 70% since 1970. So they're looking at over 5,000 species, and it's 32,000 populations because, of course, those species are located in different places in the world. So they're looking at how the populations are doing in different locations. So in essence, our environmental law, the environmental laws that we have now, provide a backstop, an evaluative pause as to how much species destruction, habitat destruction, air, water, and land pollution we're going to allow. Rather than protecting nature, our current environmental laws essentially serve as an orderly system for allowing piece by piece destruction of the planet. So our human-centric view of the world, of which our legal system is a part, isn't working. See climate change. Our addiction to fossil fuels and continued emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere is warming the planet and changing the climate at a horrifying pace. Fires, floods, droughts, hurricanes, sea level rise. I mean, it's almost biblical, right? And this December, the U.S. Climate Conference, the United Nations Climate Conference is meeting in Dubai. So countries from around the world are meeting to tackle climate change. But these meetings have been taking place since 1995. This meeting in Dubai is the 23rd such meeting. And things aren't looking too good. According to scientists at NASA, the summer of 2023 that we just experienced was the planet's hottest since we began keeping global records in 1880. Right? So what we just experienced was the hottest summer on record. And even if we drastically reduce our use of fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions now, That summer that we just experienced is our new baseline. Max talked about getting used to the new normal. So that's our new normal now. All right. And that means in terms of temperatures and all that it goes along with it. Increased fire hazards, stronger storms, more longer droughts, and flooding. So for years, scientists have told us that a global temperature rise of 1.5 Celsius is the threshold our planet cannot cross without experiencing the worst impacts of climate change. So that's 1.5 Celsius, right? We've been hearing that for years. Yet, according to the UN's latest report, temperatures have already risen 1.1 Celsius as a result of human activity. And the planet could pass the 1.5 threshold, that is the line in the sand, as early as 2030 if greenhouse gas emissions continue at the current rate. And at that point, our new normal, the planet, becomes something that we don't really recognize and understand today. So we seem to have decided that continuing use of unsustainable energy in support of our life, our lifestyle, and our wealth is worth the trade. We are literally boiling ourselves in a soup of our own making, right? We're just carrying on. We seem to have made that value judgment at this point. But can we make that decision for other species and the planet in general? Climate changes are linked to the loss of whole populations already of more than 1,000 plant and animal species on the planet. So, enter the rights of nature. What if we took a different approach, a holistic approach to pollution and our climate catastrophe? What if we were to view our world and our relation to it through an eco-centric lens? What if we were to recognize the inherent value of non-human species, ecosystems, land, water, air, and the earth itself, not just for what value they have to us as humans, but their inherent value? So, if a company wants to blast into our mountain to extract coal or other minerals, yes, the people living near the mountain will have a say. But what if the mountain had a right to speak for itself and for the critters and rock formations that are its ecosystem? What if we gave nature a seat at the table when deciding its fate? You guys know the old adage, either you're seated at the table or you're on the menu, right? So the planet is on the menu. Interestingly, this eco-centric world of the view that I'm describing, the rights of nature, almost became law in this country. In the late 1960s, Walt Disney proposed building a massive ski resort in a remote part of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The resort would include an enormous downhill skiing infrastructure, complete with hotels, restaurants, swimming pools, parking lots, all accompanied by a new highway and power line structures. So where did Walt Disney want to put this new resort and everything that went with it? Well, it chose the Mineral King Valley, pictured here. The Mineral King is a wild and pristine valley located at the headwaters of the Kaweah River. Kaweah is a Native American Yakutsan word, which in English means crow cry. And historically, This valley was inhabited by the Yakutsk tribe during the summer months. They would fish, hunt, and forage here. So as I mentioned, the river, the name of the river in Yakutsk means in English crow cry. And the crow and the eagle are important religious figures to the Yakutsk. The Yakutsk creation story says that once the world was completely covered in water, then came an eagle and a crow. And the eagle and the crow were flying, and as they were flying, they came upon a duck. And they asked the duck to bring up mud from the water so there could be land. And the duck did as he was asked, and the mud became the land of the Yakutsk. And that land today is known as the Sierra Nevada Mountains and includes the Mineral King Valley. So this creation story, and many like it, illustrate the central importance of nature and place to indigenous cultures. And in addition to being an historically important indigenous place, the Mineral King was a beloved spot for hikers and backpackers. And when the U.S. Forest Service granted the approval of Walt Disney's plans to build the ski resort here, there was public outcry. And the Sierra Club sued to stop the resort. And by 1971, that case, Sierra Club versus Morton, was headed to the United States Supreme Court. And about this time, a young law professor at the University of Southern California, Christopher Stone, was teaching his property class. And he began discussing with his students the idea that maybe nature itself might have rights. After all, non-human entities such as ships and corporations have been given legal rights in our system. Why not forests, oceans, and rivers? Professor Stone wrote about his idea in a legal journal article, arguing that, quote, "It is no answer to say that streams and forests cannot have legal standing because they cannot speak. Corporations cannot speak. Neither can states, estates, infants, municipalities, or universities. Lawyers speak for them just as they do for ordinary citizens with legal problems." So Professor Stone's article, "Should Trees Have Standing?" is still read today. And importantly, it was read at the time by one of the Supreme Court justices who was going to decide the Sierra Club versus Morton case. Justice William Douglas grew up in the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. And as a child, he had a rare form of paralysis. And he rehabilitated his condition through those long hikes in the mountains. In 1950, Justice Douglas wrote a book of Men and Mountains in which he argued that man is not separate from nature. He wrote, "When one stands on Darling Mountain, he is not remote and apart from the wilderness. He is an intimate part of it." So Justice Douglas knew, understood, and experienced the interconnectedness between humans and nature. It literally healed him. And he read Stone's article and then cited it in his opinion in the Sierra Club versus Morton case. But unfortunately, Justice Douglas could not persuade the other members of the court to adopt the rights of nature. So his was an eloquent dissenting opinion in the case. He notes that, quote, "Inanimate objects are sometimes parties in litigation. A ship has a legal personality, and similarly, a corporation is an acceptable adversary with large fortunes riding on its cases. So it should be as respects valleys, alpine meadows, rivers, lakes, estuaries, beaches, ridges, groves of trees, swampland, or even air that feels the destructive pressures of modern technology and modern life. He said, the river, for example, is the living symbol of life, all the life it sustains and nourishes. Fish, aquatic insects, water ouzels, otter, fish, deer, elk, bear, and all the other animals, including man, who are dependent on it or who enjoy its sights, its sounds, or its life. The river as plaintiff speaks for the ecological unit of life that it is part of. So, what happened to the Mineral King Valley, since we know that Justice Douglas wrote the dissenting opinion? Well, the Supreme Court majority held that the Sierra Club, who was a plaintiff in the case, didn't allege sufficient particularized injury in the case to show standing to challenge Disney's ski resort. Although they did give the Sierra Club the opportunity to go back and show particularized interest in the case. However, in the meantime, public outcry over Disney's paving over of the Mineral King Valley was so loud that Disney eventually gave up the project. So, of course, the rights of nature existed long before Professor Stone wrote his article and before Justice Douglas wrote about it in his dissenting opinion. It's been part of indigenous cultures for centuries. So, pictured here are indigenous activists, Dr. Crystal Cavalier Cack and her partner, Jason Crazy Bear Cack, who founded the 7 Directions of Service on Crystal's ancestral Occaneechi-Saponi lands. And that's where what we call the rural Piedmont region of North Carolina today. And they've both come and spoken to my class, my environmental justice class, to talk about the work they do and their experience. So 7 Directions is working for recognition of the rights of nature in North Carolina. And their movement is guided by the 7 Directions teaching, which proclaims the sanctity and vitality of each direction. And those directions are children, women, men, elders, the earth, the sky, and finally the direction within. So these teachings, as you notice, are based on and blend the sanctity of humans with nature. So how are the rights of nature recognized and successfully used today? Well, the rights of nature are increasingly becoming a part of legal systems across the globe. In 2008, Ecuador was the first country to adopt a constitutional provision recognizing the rights of nature. And that provision states, nature, or Pachamama, where life is reproduced and occurs, has the right to integral respect for its existence and for the maintenance and regeneration of its life cycles, its structures, functions, and evolutionary processes. All persons, communities, peoples, and nations can call upon public authorities to enforce the rights of nature. So that's really strong language, right? All peoples can call upon public authorities to enforce the rights of nature. So Pachamama means Earth Mother in the Aymara and Quechua languages. And Pachamama is the revered goddess of the indigenous peoples of the Andes. In Inca mythology, she is recognized as the goddess spirit of the earth, and like the earth, is to be revered and respected. The Ecuadorian Constitution also provides that nature has the right to be restored. So when we say that we're protecting nature, what if nature has been damaged? Well, the rights of nature say that it has a right to be restored. And that Ecuadorian Constitution compels the state to eliminate or mitigate harmful environmental consequences in cases of severe or permanent environmental impact. And that includes restricting activities that lead to the extinction of species and the permanent alteration of natural cycles. Indigenous voices are at the center of the Ecuadorian Constitution. In fact, the growing power of indigenous movements and peoples in Ecuador led to the 2007 Constitutional Convention, where they adopted this part of the Constitution. Now, the enforcement of the rights of nature in Ecuador has not been perfect. It's been a struggle. But recently, there have been key victories for the rights of nature in the constitutional courts of Ecuador. One of them involved the Los Cedros forest, which is located in northwest Ecuador, and it consists of almost 12,000 acres of cloud forest, 85% of which is primary growth. So that's original tree stands, okay? And the Los Cedros is one of the most biodiverse habitats on Earth. So there was an outcry when the Ecuadorian State Mining Company and its Canadian partner sought permits for a large-scale mining operation for gold and copper in the Los Cedros. But the Constitutional Court ultimately rejected those permit applications to desecrate this forest, this cloud forest. That court held that the rights of nature have the full force of law. They do not merely constitute ideals or rhetorical declarations, but are legal mandates. So there you have an articulation of the rights of nature that enforced the rights of this natural habitat and stopped it from being used as a mining site. So in addition to Ecuador, rights of nature are being recognized around the globe. So New Zealand, India, Mexico, all have enacted laws protecting the rights of nature. And numerous cities and municipalities all over the world have done so as well. In fact, here in the United States, in 2006, the Tamaqua Borough of Pennsylvania became the very first place in the world to recognize the rights of nature in law and our Western notion of law. So Tamaqua is located in the Pennsylvanian coal region of the Appalachian Mountains. Although coal mining has declined in the area, giant coal pits, some twice the size of the town, remain. So when the mining declined, right, when they were no longer mining as much coal in the area, the companies owning those pits began using them as disposal sites for toxic sludge, much of it from out of state. So the sludge from New York and New Jersey combined, for example, human waste with hospital waste and industrial chemical waste. The runoff from the pits would go into nearby rivers and creeks, causing dead zones in the water and imperiling downstream drinking water supplies. And this became a cancer hotspot, actually. So the people of Tamaqua responded by passing a ballot that banned corporations from disposing of this sludge, recognizing that natural and And natural communities and ecosystems are legal persons with rights. And they, in this ordinance, they authorize any resident of the borough to seek relief for damages caused to natural systems and communities. And the use of those pits as receptacles for toxic waste stopped. So their ordinance passed and it became law, and the toxic sludge is no longer deposited in those pits. So the town's decision to recognize and codify the rights of nature brought relief to both the humans and the ecosystems imperiled by the pollution there. So imagine what we could do in North Carolina. Remember the Cape Fear River Basin, the PFAS, the whack-a-mole problem? What if the Cape Fear River Basin had rights? So notably, EPA is currently drafting legal regulations limiting the use of PFAS in industry, right? But at the same time, in September of this year, EPA authorized Comores, which is the origin of the Gen X in the Cape Fear River Basin, to import up to 2,000 tons of Gen X PFAS waste from the company's facility in the Netherlands to the Comores facility in North Carolina. That decision happened in September. Now, hot off the press, just today, the EPA has announced that it is reevaluating that decision, right? But so what if during this evaluation period, the Cape Fear River Basin had a seat at the table and its rights were part of the consideration that EPA thought about in making this final decision? All right, so here is the Haw River. The Haw River and its watershed, including Jordan Lake, provide drinking water to over 1 million people living in and around the cities of Greensboro, Burlington, Chapel Hill, Cary, and Durham. Okay? Over 10 years ago, the Haw River was listed as one of the most endangered rivers in the United States. It didn't make the top 10 since then, but it's still struggling under pollution runoff from development and from toxic chemicals. And the Haw has one of the highest concentrations of PFAS. This September, in addition to the PFAS, high levels of 1,4-dioxin, my scientist friend probably knows what that is, were released from a municipal wastewater treatment plant in Burlington into the Haw River. So that type of dioxin is a probable carcinogen that causes liver and kidney cancer in humans. And of course, dioxin can cause deep and lasting damage to the river and its ecosystem. That dioxin came from Apollo Chemicals, which had disposed of its industrial waste containing the dioxin through the municipal sewage system in Burlington. Now, municipal sewage systems basically treat human waste and household waste and runoff from street and road surfaces. They're not built to treat toxic waste and take them out of wastewater before it's put back into the ecosystem. So what if the Haw River has the right to seek damages from the chemical company for the damages that were done to the river by the discharges into this ecosystem? What if the chemical company was accountable to the Haw River for the damage caused to its ecosystem by dioxin? Well, this year, in fact, during this legislative session, Representative Pricey Harrison introduced House Bill 795, the Rights of the Haw River Ecosystem River Act. Representative Harrison worked with the indigenous group, Seven Directions, that I told you about, to craft the law. And if it were to become law, which, surprise, that's a long shot, but if it were to become law, it would recognize and protect both the rights of the Haw River ecosystem itself and the rights of the people of North Carolina to a healthy, thriving Haw River. So the co-sponsors also include John Autry and Marcia Morey. And the bill provides the following, key provisions, which are already up there. So the rights of nature. That provision provides that the Haw River ecosystem possesses the right to naturally exist, to flow, to flourish, to regenerate, and to evolve. It also covers the rights to nature and says that all North Carolinians possess the right to a flourishing and healthy Haw River ecosystem, as well as the rights to file an action or intervene in litigation to protect those rights and the rights of the Haw River ecosystem. It further talks about enforcement and says that the state attorney general is authorized to enforce and defend both the rights of and the rights to a healthy Haw River ecosystem, and says that the new provisions shall not infringe upon any existing indigenous rights. And finally says that businesses or other entities that are found to have damaged the Haw River ecosystem are responsible for paying restoration costs in addition to civil penalties. So there's damage accountability. Pretty revolutionary. Hey, if Pennsylvania can do it, why not us, right? All right, let's look at another jewel in North Carolina's crown, our incredible coastline. Here's a picture of the Pamlico Sound in the Cape Hatteras National Seashore. So sea rise is contributing to the erosion of the entire North Carolina coast. Development and pollution have also had a hand in degrading our coastal areas. And I want to talk for a minute about plastic pollution and its impacts on the North Carolina ecosystem, including the critters in it. Plastic use has doubled in the past 20 years. Plastic use has doubled in the past 20 years. So recognizing the damage done by plastics in the environment, whether we're talking about sea creatures being tangled up in plastic bags, or the breakdown of plastics into tiny microplastics that are found in our bloodstream and the bloodstreams of critters across the world. Recognizing those dangers, the United Nations Environmental Assembly in March 2022 adopted an historic resolution to develop a global plastics treaty. And the plastics treaty is to be negotiated this coming year. The goal is to reduce plastic pollution, including ocean pollution and microplastics, across the entire plastics life cycle. So that means the creation of plastics, the use of plastics, and the disposal of plastics. And the Intergovernmental Committee negotiating the treaty has met twice, and a third meeting is scheduled for this month in Nairobi, Kenya. So, does anyone know where plastics come from? Right. 99% of plastics come from fossil fuels. And who is the biggest producer of plastics? Right. And specific oil companies, right? So specifically, ExxonMobil is the biggest producer of plastics. Shout out to ExxonMobil. Okay, so plastic bags, disposable plastic bags, are the biggest visible culprit. in harming sea creatures. And for this reason, many coastal communities all over the United States coastal systems, including North Carolina, limit or ban the use of plastic bags and other containers in those towns. Well, I'm here to tell you that the North Carolina General Assembly took notice and included in this year's budget, which is now law, is a provision that prohibits municipalities from restricting or regulating the use of auxiliary containers, which includes plastic bags, cups, and packaging. So the General Assembly literally passed a bill to stop coastal communities from banning the use of plastic bags. So what if the Pamlico Sound and the Cape Hatteras National Seashore, Emerald Isle, all the rest, what if they had a right to be part of this conversation, to fight for the seabirds, the sea turtle, and so many other creatures and plants existing in these ecosystems? Imagine. So our human-centric view of the world and our planet is not working. We need nature to survive. Interestingly, the reverse is not true. Nature doesn't need human beings to survive, although we are currently the author of its destruction. Vast areas of our planet have been altered by human hands in some way, shape, or form. And the rights of nature recognizes that non-human inhabitants of this planet, animals on land and in sea, birds, plants, trees, forests, rivers, mountains, ecosystems should have a voice in our use and our misuse of this planet we all share. Heck, we give corporations legal rights to provide our society with economic expediency. Why not recognize the rights of nature to survive and thrive? Might just save humanity. Thank you so much.
Professor Maria Savasta-Kennedy. All right, we have we have questions in the in-house audience. I'm going to come over to the microphone so the people online can hear. And folks in the online audience, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to put a question there and I'll come over and get it. I have a question from Bill and then here first. Okay. Bill.
Thank you, Max. Okay. Suppose you were debating and you can pick your poison. Maybe somebody from Mobil Exxon would be a good person, and from a large corporation. And they said the reason we're enjoying the quality of life that we have now is because of the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution was at least partially about killing off nature, or at least controlling nature. How would you answer that question, or in a debate?
Well, so I'd say if we continued on the path that we're on, we're going to end up killing off ourselves, because as I said, we've already passed and are passing thresholds that are going to make our planet a different place and not habitable for everybody who currently lives there. And moreover, I'd say, well, that's looking at what the Industrial Revolution has done for humans. And that's part of our human-centered view of the world, right? Everything we can do to make our lifestyle. Compare that to indigenous cultures, where you use only what you need and you use renewable resources, because there's a recognition that we're all connected. And if we use up all the resources and poison our own pool, then we go too.
You win.
Hi there. God, I feel like sobbing.
Oh,
No, it's okay. I've had eco grief for like 30 years. I married a biologist. Our honeymoon was to a eco. Yeah. Um, my question is an unanswerable, but how did we become so absurdly abstracted from our connectedness such that yesterday I saw a woman with like 40 plastic bags coming out of Harris Teeter, and I want to grab every single one of them and suffocate her, excuse me. But I want to just say, don't you get it? And I don't understand how. I mean, how did we become so stupid in terms of we have no role and let's just have more and more plastic, which, now you can't even buy a single grape without having 40 layers of plastic around it. How did this devolve?
wow, that's a big question, right? But I do think that I do think that people feel a sense of helplessness and think, what the hell? What difference is my plastic bag going to make? And the plastic bag does make a difference, because the way you view your role in in going grocery shopping and using containers makes a difference. So I think it's, the new normal. We got used to doing with all these conveniences. How wonderful. Look at all these conveniences we have. And now we can't do without it.
Question, Tom?
Terrifically ignorant legal question. Is this mostly about standing? You talk about the Haw River having rights. Well, people can sue on behalf of the Haw River now because they are harmed or can.
Exactly.
But is it just about standing?
Wait, are you a lawyer?
I have a daughter who's a lawyer.
All right. Well, there are other lawyers in this crowd, and you're exactly right. It is about standing. It's about legal standing for the mountain, for the ecosystem. So instead of, go back to the example that I gave about the mountaintop being blown up for coal mining. So right now, the people living near the mountain can sue. They can sue for pollution to their water. They can sue for changes to their use and enjoyment of the mountain. They can't go hiking on it anymore. But the rights of nature say that the mountain and its ecosystems and the critters living there have their own voice. And just like corporations, which are non-human entities, fictitious entities, those beings deserve to have a say and deserve to have a right to stand up in court.
Okay, we have a question here.
Say a little more about the possible role of the legal system. It seems to me that the legislature can pass a particularly interesting law along this line, and then 10 years later, another legislature in the same state might decide that that's not in public interest and not even enforce it. What happens?
Well, yeah, there's no easy answer to that. I will say that years ago when I was practicing law, I helped defend California's truth and environmental advertising law. And so I was with Earth Justice at the time, and we intervened on behalf of the California Attorney General to keep this law alive. So the law said that, hey, if you say something is recyclable, it has to be recyclable in California. If you say it's renewable, then it has to have 10% non-consumer renewable waste in it. And the law was challenged by the manufacturing industry. And we took that, we won in the district court, we won in the Ninth Circuit, we went to the Supreme Court, they denied cert, they didn't want to hear it. So it was good law. Then the California legislature overturned it. So can only say that, if we get a momentum going and the rights of nature become our new normal and part of the way we think, then it's going to be harder to just take it away.
We have a question.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
This is related to standing. I mean, we can hear and see nature crying out in many different ways, but you don't hear it crying out in the court of law. Who has the right and the obligation to speak for nature? I mean, the indigenous people might feel one way about a mountain, and manufacturer feel another way about a mountain.
Sure. So if you look at, for example, the Ecuadorian constitution, it said that any person has the right to enforce the rights of nature on behalf of these ecosystems. And same with the Pennsylvania borough. So the idea would be that, and as I mentioned briefly, there are different variations of the rights of nature. So you could have a guardian appointed for the rights of the Haw River system. Or you could have a rights of nature scheme where any person could go in and speak for the river. And you mentioned that, of course, there may be opposing views, right? Because the opposing interests of the developer might come into play. But I think yes. And actually, I think what you're saying is, what if you and I have different ideas about what rights the Haw River has? How do we duke it out and decide who gets to go into court? Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, that's something that needs to be worked out. And it, as I mentioned in the two systems that I talked about in Ecuador and in Pennsylvania, the wording is any person. Yeah.
Can I add to that just to say, and this is sort of a cynical and a silly example, but someone could interpret what the mountain wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
The mountain wants a ski area on it. It loves people, right? And that's absurd. So, but to get to the reality of it, is there the normative basis to define what nature is and what the natural state of something, and is that necessary to codify before you can have the rights of nature, so that when someone comes in and says, this mountain wants to experience the joy of people skiing on it, that's absurd when you would say, so I guess what is the normative basis for where it starts?
Right. So if you look at Pricey Harrison's bill, she defines, and the 7 ways define the Haw River, the rights of nature for the Haw River ecosystem as possessing the right to naturally exist, to flourish, regenerate, and evolve. So I think that a judge or a jury listening to, the Haw River system is now going to be a giant water slide for a new King's Dominion, and that's what it wants. It would be, that would be a difficult argument to make when you're talking about the river naturally existing, flourishing, regenerating, and evolving.
Kind of goes, this is a concept of like state of nature, right? You go in a philosophical sense, right?
Yes.
Right. Questions here?
So I like to be proactive. Can you name one thing that many of us in this room can do to try to help the situation given the current legal and political landscape?
Vote.
Beyond that.
So, from doing things like, taking your own bags to the grocery store, that kind of stuff, composting. And I think learning more about the rights of nature, talking to people about what you've learned and getting the word out and asking your representatives about this. I think the more it becomes part of our conversation, the more normalized it becomes. And it really is important to vote so that there are people who listen to what you have to say.
Question up here, and I see one on deck up front.
Well, just from a practical point of view, keeping our beaches clean, this state earns a lot of money from people coming to our beaches. Why wouldn't we want to keep them clean? Who was leaning on the legislature with us to make a silly rule like that?
I don't know in particular. It was honestly one of a cast of horribles that were part of this last session. from my perspective as an environmentalist.
I mean, there seems to be almost sort of a spiteful scorn
Yes.
for tree huggers, whatever, this sort of language. Is that what's animating this type of
Yeah, I mean, it
legislation?
really does feel that, right? So much for the local experiments that are traditionally thought of as, I will say, conservative thinking, like let localities figure it out themselves. Don't put big government down and tell them what to do. Well, I guess that's the case when it comes to, using plastic bags and having, sanctity of your body.
Professor to professor question.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh.
The political problem here, I think, is that the corporations don't say, Walt Disney, when he wants to do a ski resort, doesn't say, I want to make $1 gazillion. What he says, and what ExxonMobil says, is what we're doing is providing jobs. What we're doing is providing an increased economy that helps the community. Not only are we providing thousands of jobs for the little guys and women, we're providing the economy which keeps the little stores going, and this is the picture that they're painting. The question is, how do you counteract that problem? I know there's an answer to it, but politically it ain't easy.
It ain't easy. And it's been the same argument for decades, really. It's like, hey, jobs versus the environment. But haven't we gotten to the place where, the coal is not an economically viable or environmentally viable source of energy, right? So why are we still talking about coal mining jobs? We are talking about and should be talking about retraining people for a new economy and renewable energy jobs. So it's a false dichotomy. It assumes that we can go on this way indefinitely, and that it's just, when we say environment, we really mean a nice place for people in the Sierra Club to go hike and go canoeing in. But what we're talking about is our survival.
I have a question about corporations and their standing. You mentioned about corporations have status as personhood, we know. Yet they seem to be very, very well shielded from criminal law and only suffer civil penalties. And perhaps if it breaks down into some criminal activity, it becomes individuals that are criminally responsible within the corporation.
Right.
Can you explain, is there a fix for that that's related to the rights of nature?
I don't know. We do have a criminal law professor here, but I don't know if he's got a fix for it.
Would you like to be put on the spot? But 1 second, let me make sure everyone can hear.
No, it does exist, but yeah, it's hard to prosecute. And practically speaking, you get a lot more out of deterring people from committing corporate crimes than trying to deter the corporation. It's a matter of effectiveness, but I don't know how that relates to the law of nature.
Questions over here, Charlie.
Just like to make a comment about the complexities of this that I see. Unfortunately, climate change is never our most important issue that we are dealing with. It seems like it should be, but as a simple example would be, look at the world today, where obviously climate change is a huge problem, and then look at the United States, where we are going to open up some areas for some new drilling. But there's a security piece of that too. Are we better off as a country today having more energy independence than being hostage to what's going on in the Middle East and some other areas? So I don't think that, these things are as clear as they seem to be. And for the foreseeable future, we're going to continue to need oil or natural gas, etc. it's just a very complex equation.
It is very complex. I mean, we don't live in the world of the Yakut Native Americans, right? But, you know, even if we drilled all the oil reserves in the United States, it wouldn't be enough to make us energy independent beyond like a dozen years. And we really need to find a renewable source of energy. And moreover, conflicts that we see, I won't claim that what's happening in the Middle East is directly related to the environment, but migration, people crossing borders and leaving their countries because they're no longer inhabitable, that's a security risk and a humanitarian catastrophe, and that's related to climate change, and it's only going to continue. So it is very complex.
So I would like to just add too, and to keep your eye on this on our programs coming up in the spring that we're doing with the Carolina Biodiversity Collaborative, because this is a depressing thought. But
Another one.
Climate change is not the only thing we have to worry about. We could fix climate change and we could still be destroying the human species if we don't protect biodiversity.
Okay.
And of course, much of biodiversity is being affected by climate change, so they're very much inextricably linked. But that's an important piece of this as well. And this gets, I think, directly to a little bit more of a tangible sense of rights of nature, right? And that there's something abstract for people about temperature rising. And yes, we see these effects, but it's this notion of what happens in your own backyard. And you see that changing. What happens in your own wheat fields that can't grow because they don't have the right pollinate, you know, whatever. I'm over my head for science here, but
no, you're dead on. And I mean, there's really two different sides to this. One is doing the morally correct thing and protecting non-human species, because do we have a right to destroy the earth in service of our standard of living? So there's that moral side of it, but there's also this instrumental part, which is, you know, we're cooking in our own soup here.
Yeah. So it's climate change, and if we fix climate change, but we keep destroying biodiversity, we're equally doomed.
Yeah.
Real quickly, this is like a third rail, but population control ever come up in this since we're exploding into 9 billion?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really prepared to talk about that. I mean, it's definitely a part of it, and it's, you know, populations are exploding, particularly in places where, you know, it's not sustainable for the people who live there already. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't have an answer for that, but
my understanding is that the overall population of the globe will plateau at some point in the middle, but that's not the issue. It's the overpopulation in certain places and the access to resources. But, you know, it's not that there's this going to 12 million, 14 million. They don't see that. They say it might plateau at 8 or 9 or somewhere around there. But then again, some places are heavily overpopulated. Do we have questions from the online audience at all? I want to remind the online audience they can join us in the room by putting a thing on the question and answer button. But Brent has a question back here.
I've got two questions on that Chemours plant on the Cape Fear River. What current enforcement action is EPA involved with them? In other words, where are we and where does the EPA want to get us? And the second question had to do with what are they importing from the Netherlands or proposed to do? What is it, and why are they importing it?
Okay, so the current enforcement action is based on the Clean Water Act. So discharges from the Chemours facility into the river system that exceeded their permit limits. So the Clean Water Act says that every point source of pollutants into a waterway, a navigable waterway, like a pipe coming out of the side of the Chemours facility into the river, has to have a permit on it that says what type of pollution is coming out of that pipe and how much. And so there's a Clean Water Act case to enforce the permit that Chemours had because they were exceeding their limits. And then, of course, once they discovered the toxic effects of Gen X, then they and Department of Environmental Quality, which is the local government entity that enforces the big laws, the Clean Water Act, for example, said, you can't emit that anymore from your facility. Don't use it anymore. But as I mentioned, there are 15,000 different types of PFAS and PFOA. So what's happened is every time we say, don't use that one, another chemical compound is evolved. And then we have to play catch up with that. And your other question, could you repeat your
It's
question?
what are they bringing in from the Netherlands?
Correct. And
Yes.
what and why?
So, it's just waste material from the Chemours plant and in the Netherlands, and they don't have room for it and wanted to import it to the Cape Fear River facility. Yeah.
The question for the online audience was, what are they going to do with this stuff here? Are they storing it? What are they doing with it?
That part hasn't been clear. The September letter that I was referring to from EPA just said, initially, you have permission to do that. So to bring it over. And as I mentioned, just today, EPA announced that it's reconsidering that decision. So it's not clear, were they going to, if they store it on bins on site, they have to comply with the Toxic Substances Control Act and the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. How can they safely store it or dispose of it? That's the problem, and that's the outcry and why they are reconsidering the decision.
I have a chemistry and law question for you that maybe our two brilliant
God.
chemists in the front row might want to chime in on. The question is about the 15,000 different things. I assume what's happening is there are slight variations in the chemical formulation.
Correct.
That's making so it's this version number 2, but
Right.
then number 3 is different. Why can't there be a general class, if all of these are so closely related, go up one step higher and say that entire class of chemicals has a certain rules or policy around it? And the reason I said maybe our chemists would want to say why that's impossible to do, but from a legal perspective, why can't that happen?
Well, people are advocating for EPA to do that
Okay.
in these regulations that it's currently drafting.
Okay.
To try and look at the whole class of chemicals. But it's difficult because industry, if you have something that's heat resistant, water resistant, grease resistant, how are you going to find something that does that you can make your products with? So companies are trying to comply with the law. They're not out there like Snidely Whiplash, people are trying to make products that we use, that we want to use because they're heat resistant, water resistant, and grease resistant. And that's the reason why we're seeing these different compounds. So there's going to be a lot of blowback about that kind of a type of chemical, body of chemical ban. But necessity is the mother of invention. So maybe we'll come up with new ways.
It seems like an interesting combination of that, this whole idea of our lifestyle and sort of putting this idea on it. Do you like your nonstick pan? And if you want to keep cooking with your nonstick pan, it's sort of a way of kind of diffusing the guilt of all of this, right? And so how do we as humanists speak about our own complicity in this and not feel like we are, part of the evil doers, and at the same time are empowered to do something beyond voting? I guess it's a philosophical question.
Yeah,
here.
well, I think knowledge is powerful, because understanding that your nonstick pan is probably leaching types of PFOA and PFAS into your food may make you rethink using it and cooking with those types of cookware. So I think knowledge, it's important for people to understand. Like, it's not just this Chemours on the banks of this river sort of sent this out through the pipe. Like, well, where does it come from? Well, they're using it. It's also 3M is another huge company in Alabama. There was a big case there using it, and it's in fire retardants.
Yeah.
You know, we have big problems at our military bases because, you know, we put out munitions fires using foam that's heat resistant. And it's leached into the aquifer that basically has created all kinds of problems for people in our service, our military living there.
Maybe we should have done this one close to the holiday season. We could give recommendations for nonstick pans that you can feel good about using, right?
Great idea.
Do we have further questions for Professor Maria Savasta-Kennedy? Let's put our hands together for the rights of natures. I want to thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. And I want to just give you a little preview of what's coming up. We'll give you one more chance to say thank you for Professor's wonderful presentation. I just want to let you folks know what we have coming up next in Humanities in Action. Next week is our last. I'm bent down here, hovered down. I'm sorcerer down here. Here I am. Next week is our last Humanities in Action. This on Wednesday, we have Rebecca Kreitzer from Public Policy coming and talking about abortion law around the states. And changes and updates, and we've had some interesting news recently. So there'll be that should be a really fascinating. This is, of course, how things have changed since the Dobbs decision. And then we have a lot of music I want to share with you folks. So first of all, we will finish up with Humanities in Action next Wednesday, but on Wednesday, November 29th, please come back here at 6 o'clock for our final music program. 6 o'clock and not 4 o'clock. Yes, 6 o'clock, and I'll announce it quite loudly. 1800 if you're on military time. And that's Kate McGarry and Keith Gans. It's jazz, vocals, and guitar, and we have a really nice time. We have a conversation and great music. But we also have weekend seminars coming up, an event that we're doing in concert. With the chamber orchestra of the Triangle, the Italian Baroque Masters of Sentiment, and we're going to be co-hosting a lecture that starts at 2 o'clock, and then the concert starts at 3 o'clock. So that's this Sunday at Meeser Auditorium. And you can go to Carolina Public Humanities for any of this information, humanities.unc.edu. And then finally, our What is Opera? Saturday, November 18th. This is a weekend seminar with the wonderful Tim Carter, explain to you all. I know you think you know what opera is, but Tim Carter is going to tell you much more than you think that you ever, probably more than you need to know, but he's wonderful to listen to. Also, we have our final seminar is Modern Civic Life and Public Health Across the Americas. That's on Saturday, December 2nd. So for any of those programs, please check out humanities.unc.edu. Before we go, I want to thank Flyleaf Books. Let's put our hands together for Flyleaf Books. Let's put our hands together for our wonderful staff, Paul Bonici, Beth Gardner, Michaela Sinclair. Michaela Sinclair has, wait, I don't want to miss out on this, is the producer of a wonderful film coming up tomorrow. Michaela, I got it written down here. Give me one moment. And this is tomorrow at 5 in the See How We Fly at 5 p.m. Michaela is the president of the film group up at the Film Club. Okay. Producer of this is at Peabody 1040. It's at 5 o'clock tomorrow. It's a wonderful film, so check that out. Also, I want to thank the Mirka Baumberger Group at Morgan Stanley, the North Carolina Yana Society, Carolina Meadows, a retirement community here in Chapel Hill, and our very special friends, Carolina alumni, who help sponsor this very program. Come back up here one more time so we can thank you. Put your hands together. Professor Maria Savasta-Kennedy, wonderful. And please, respect the rights of nature. We'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.